This particular session we call SDIC, and it stands for what we have here, Systematic Development of Informed Consent. And next time you're between the rock and the hard place, if you can remember what the concepts behind there are, it may help you. But what this SDIC course is about, what do you do when what you propose is going to step on somebody's toes, which it will. And they're going to say, heck no, you're not going to do that. It's about how to get it implemented when implementation is difficult. And because of the difficulty, it's going to be controversial. Now, there is an implementation problem. There's a problem with what I just went through. You have technical experts on your teams that have the technical expertise to do this. And of course, what technical expert, whether it's engineering or public health or law enforcement or whatever, depends on what the mission of the agency is and what the problem is that you're addressing. The problem is, one of the problems is that every solution to a bigger complex problem will hurt some interests. That's just a fact of life, okay? You can quit your job, you can go to work for the local board of education, for the superintendent of education in your district. They will have you ask on problems. You will go through that problem-solving process. I can predict the solutions you come up with will have some negative effects on some interest. They're going to say, not in my backyard. No, that's not the way to do it. And who can blame them? In other words, it would be rational for someone, whether it's an individual, a group, a corporation, an institution, or either some other government agency who has a mission different from yours, maybe almost the opposite of yours, to say no, hell no. And so no matter how well you do this technical work, I can predict somebody is going to say hell no. Now, we're not talking about the case where you do a rotten job in there. That's different. If you do a rotten job in any one of those steps, somebody should torpedo you, and they probably will. I'm talking about when you do fantastic work, when you do Pulitzer Prize winning work, when you do Nobel Prize winning work, you will still have negative effects on somebody. Well, look at the political debates that are going on right now. No matter who these various candidates are for president, yes, they have some ideas, and every one of them has costs attached, negative things attached, and some people say, no, that's not the right thing to do. I don't disagree with your goal, but gee whiz, don't do that to me. Don't have this negative effect. Not only are they going to say no, they basically have learned they don't have to take no for an answer from you, the bureaucracy, because they can always politically end run you, whether it's local government, regional, state, or federal. So you do this work, these minimum things, but you do it in an environment where you're surrounded by the League of Women Voters, Mr. Z, this is the person who's always involved, some landowners, some sister agencies, some policymakers, former employees who are out there and angry and need to get even because and what tends to happen to that process we had, just about at the 11th hour as you do decision making, all hell tends to break loose. This is as predictable as clockwork. Now, it can break loose for many different reasons. It could break loose because you did drop the ball in one or more of these steps. And in that case, all hell needs to break loose. But I'm saying even if you did this work perfectly, I can predict all hell is very likely. Because in a public agency, in the United States, this crucial step, the actual choice of alternative solutions is not made by experts. This work is done by experts. This is done by lay people who are either elected or appointed politically. Policy in the United States, because we're a democracy, is made politically. And a lot of technical people say, well, that's a crazy system. Something is broken. How can we have non-experts do that? Well, get real. We always do it that way, in every field. It's even true in our personal lives. Experts give advice. They don't make policy. They may give advice on policy, but the decision making is made by politicians. So guess what? Your teams of experts, you do the homework, you do the analysis, And then you give advice to decision makers. Now, a lot of the SDIC course is going to be about to make sure that all hell does not break loose, so that the decision that gets made is consistent with the expert work. Because it's so frustrating when you really have come up with good solutions to a really serious problem where it is the right thing to do and you can't get the decision makers to make a decision. But please understand, if you are crazy enough to work in the public arena, decisions will be made politically. It is totally hypocritical to work in the public arena and then bitch about politics. It is as hypocritical as insisting on being a pilot and then bitching about gravity. And I spent a lot of time in aviation, and I've never seen a pilot walk away from a bad landing and say, I could have handled that if it wasn't for gravity, if just gravity would get off my back. But I've seen a lot of public officials work in the public arena, city managers and other administrators who say, I could have handled that if it wasn't for politics. Because as long as you work in the public arena, your work has to make it through the political fire. It has to survive the political debate. And if what comes out at the end of the political debate is something different from what you have analyzed, you have failed. You have failed as an agency, you have failed as professionals, you have failed as a team. So a lot of it has to do with developing informed consent so that when push comes to shove, when all hell breaks loose, the political decision makers will understand enough of this where they will make the decision that is the right decision from a technical point of view. So what we're going to argue is when the politicians don't make that decision, it's your fault. Don't bitch about it, it is your fault. Because if your analysis is rigorous, and if you have a really informed public, chances are you can develop informed consent. Now, this is not consensus. It is something much lower than consensus. Consensus is a very high level of agreement. This is where the opponents at least say, I can live with it. No, I wouldn't have done it that way, but I can live with it. You'll see, I'll explain more of it, okay? Even though people say, well, it's the public. Usually it's not the public. It's a few, what we call PAIs, potentially affected interests. Usually it's just a few, sometimes one person. It's usually a tiny minority within the public. The fact that it's a tiny minority doesn't really matter. In our system of government, even tiny special interest groups, sometimes a single individual with no organization can throw a monkey wrench into the machinery of government. You see, with all hell breaking loose, what tends to happen is where somehow just the decision making breaks down and the decision doesn't get made. It stalls. If I'm an opponent and I want to kill your proposal, I don't really have to kill it. All I have to do is make sure that the decision makers won't make a decision. And that is relatively easy to do. When the majority in a public is either neutral or for something, and a tiny minority is against it, and they can clobber the majority. That's called a veto. Now, in most governments, when that happens, that's broken, that's wrong. Please, in our system, it was designed to work that way. So please understand, when one phone call to a senator can kill your project, the system is working. At every level of government is painfully ineffective because of what I've just described. Because of what I call the implementation problem. Government is not nearly as effective as it needs to be, as it ought to be, and here's the positive part, as it can be. Now, we're going to spend these 3 days very much on what kind of public involvement, what kind of outreach, what kind of communication can you do so that your proposal will survive that test that comes around the decision-making time. Our real agenda is making organizations more effective, making them better at accomplishing their mission, especially when you have an agency that has a mission that is complex, controversial, and therefore difficult to do. This SDIC CPO strategy of outreach, public involvement, citizen participation is a strategy that's designed to make you more effective.